Yeah.
She said we need a slab. I was about to say, I'm gonna cut you off, Jordan. Like to say everything in your second.
Gotta take full advantage, you know.
Hi, Lucy.
Hello, hello.
Script. Well, welcome everybody. Kathy Corliss will be joining us shortly, but I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Clerk, will you call the roll? Corliss. Halliburton.
Here.
Morales.
Here.
Nash.
Here.
Stead. Here. Willett.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent. Thank you. First up, we've got Alicia and Maureen Brewer. Oh, Maureen's here to answer some questions. Alicia as well. Come on up for the interim budget changes.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. Just one interim budget change for your consideration today. PDS requests a budget neutral IBC of $1.44 million in fiscal year 2026 and $800,000 ongoing. This request is budget neutral because all personnel and M&O costs will be covered by higher than expected development fee revenue. Boise continues to experience high levels of development activity, especially large commercial projects. In just the first quarter of fiscal year 2026, PDS collected $6.6 million, or 34% of the full year development fee budget. Based on current trends, revenues are projected to finish the year about $3 million above budget, and this activity is expected to continue through fiscal year 28. That increased revenue is directly tied to an increase in workload. More projects mean more inspections, more plan review, and more project support. Current staffing levels are not keeping pace, which can create service delays. So this request does two things to prevent service delays for the development community. One, it adds 7 targeted positions to relieve bottlenecks in inspections, plan review, and planning. And then it funds one-time operational investments to improve efficiency, customer service, and workspace safety. So again, development activity is generating more revenue, but it's also generating more work. This request aligns the staffing and operations with that demand using the development revenue that is driving the workload. I'm happy to take any questions, Madam Mayor, council members, but I know Director Brewer also has some comments prepared as well.
Sure, I'm sorry. No, I'm actually trying to look at Meredith Stead. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I think this is the first time I've spoken since yesterday. I was directing everything through a Mr. Chairman. Do you want to hear from Maureen before we take questions?
Yeah, why don't we? Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Thanks.
Mayor, council members, Maureen Brewer, planning director for the city. And I had just prepared a few comments because I know that this is a significant IBC. We certainly recognize that. And we are primarily here before you making this request for 2 reasons, those being our staff team and our customers. So I just wanted to share a few perhaps summary or illustrative statements about why now and where we're headed and the strategy that's really underpinning our approach. And then to the degree that it's helpful, I can be as specific as possible about the justification beyond what Alicia has shared and beyond what the text of the IBC delineates. Again, if that's helpful, just in terms of why we're coming to you now versus as part of the FY27 budget build. So the take homes are really threefold. One is that, as Alicia stated, we are taking the surplus revenue that PDS is generating and investing that revenue back into the services and staff that those fees pay for. This request is revenue supported, and we have included these costs, including those ongoing staff costs, in the 5 to 10-year forecast to demonstrate that. So yes, this could be perceived as a big ask, but I just wanted to reiterate that we are being prudent and thoughtful about what's sustainable moving forward in terms of ongoing costs. And then two, because our business model is to do the work and then collect the fees, unfortunately, PDS is in this near constant position of always trying to catch up to meet demand. And right now, with surplus revenue being what it is, or revenue being what it is, we have an opportunity to meaningfully catch up. So this need to catch up is magnified by the fact that our team is currently dealing with several long-term medical absences. Staff are unable to take days off without significantly delaying projects. Micron's Fab 2 is coming ahead of when we anticipated it would. And then we are also trying to manage an over 50% increase in PLN. So that is where our planning project applications begin. So all of this means that we need to and have the opportunity to take immediate steps to stabilize our department. So for today, then, what we tried to do was separate out what are truly immediate needs and therefore reflected in this IBC request before you versus what can reasonably wait to be requested through the FY27 budget build. And then they wanted to share that alongside that forthcoming FY27 budget request, in partnership with finance, we want to bring forward a recommendation to update our development fees. And the goal there is really it's really to bring structural balance to the development fee model. Right now, our model relies heavily on volume and high value volume, particularly, and that is not sustainable. We do know that. And then trailing that, likely for the FY28 budget build, we'd like to bring forward a recommendation for how to establish a sustainable fund to manage development costs and revenue. So that being said, we do have near-term, mid-term, and long-term strategies that we are mapping now, but we also have these immediate needs. And given how far ahead revenue is already this year over and above what we budgeted, it's not in the best interest of our staff or our customers to ask them to wait another many months, the better part of another year, when the work and the need exists now, and when we have the resources and the revenue to do something about it. So our approach is really both and. Take action now where we see it's immediately needed so that we can stabilize the department, and in so doing, deliver the level of the level of service that our customers expect and frankly that they're paying for. And then also make sure that we plan for the opportunity the surplus revenue has created to position ourselves well into the future with the intention of really avoiding these boom and bust scenarios that are tough on everyone, our staff and customers alike. Happy to stand for questions.
Thanks, Maureen. Questions?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Maureen, could you tell me how this works going forward? I assume PDS is not exclusively a fee only revenue, that this is going to be a mix of fees and general fund going forward. So how are we looking at that in the budget build and the ongoing appropriation?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, thank you for the question. So at this time, this is what Director Brewer alluded to. We're partnering with PDS to map out and look at the cost recovery of the PDS fees. So right now, yes, the fees are recovering costs and then some. And so we are modeling what that looks like into the future. And they partnered with an external consultant to look at the cost recovery and what is needed to cover costs in a more sustainable way into the future, so as to not rely on the general fund. So what we are looking at is a sustainable plan into the future, and that's what you alluded to in bringing that forward once we have done more stress testing on it.
Could you speak to, it seems like some of the surplus that we had that lengthy IBC for in December was related to fee revenue that we did not anticipate. And I don't know if this is additional fee revenue we did not anticipate. And it seems like really have our general fund revenue down to a science, which is a very complicated formula to arrive at what we get at. But it seems like maybe fee revenue is a little bit more unpredictable. And I guess, how are we thinking about that both now and in the future?
Madam Mayor, Representative or Councilmember Nash. Yes, this revenue is a bit unpredictable and cyclical. I think the very nature of it and being that we've had such large projects, Micron, St. Luke's projects, and that they're valuation based is why we've seen increases in the revenue relative to our budget. And as I said, expected for the next couple of years, just the sheer size of the projects and the volume of the projects coming through. But the fee revenue that you reference, the $8 million that was set aside, is also part of the calculus that we are working on, the analysis of this separate self-sustaining fund that we are analyzing, and that will be part of the projection as we move forward.
And Madam Mayor, one final question. I imagine that a good deal of this revenue is coming from a select number of projects. Maybe it's a high volume, but I imagine it's just a few projects. Do we anticipate that the workload of the individuals that are going to be hired is going to help offset? Like, do those few projects generate the same or more work relative to your overall caseload, or?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, that's a good question. Certainly the high valuation projects generate an intense amount of workload. It's not it's not necessarily a one-to-one planning versus building, if you will. So our building team is particularly stressed, if you will, by these sort of highly valuated projects, Micron being one of them. And then the volume that Alicia alluded to, and I did too in my comments, is really where you see the workload picking up in earnest on our planning side of the house.
Thank you.
Madam
For the-
Mayor,
Yes.
I have a series
ahead.
of questions, but I don't know what you would like to do. If you want me to do a couple of them and then give another chance, how would you like to
No,
handle that?
why don't you just go ahead through them?
Okay. All right. Alicia or Maureen, whoever wants to take these, can you talk to us about whether this is purely related to volume of projects versus is this a change because of the zoning code? Help us understand that.
Council member, we're having a trouble hearing you. I'll see also if tech here can
Can
up
you hear
that
me better?
volume.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you better, yeah.
Well enough to hear a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Maureen and Alicia, I'm curious to see is this increased revenue directly tied to more projects, or is it a result of different kind of work because of the modern zoning code?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, I think the response is both. So there is a different work model at play because of the modern zoning code. And we are also seeing a tremendous amount of volume.
Thank you. And then since the modern zoning code was passed, how many FTEs have been appropriated to the planning department?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, since the zoning code was made effective, I don't have that number in front of me today. I can track that down. But I don't know that we have added staff since 2023, but I'd have to check.
Okay. And then one of the things that the city is working on is innovation, and Kyle's come and talked to us about that a number of times. I recall a work session where we talked about the average um, time that it took to get a permit. Do we have any data to show um, what the time is now, how it's changed because of lack of staff? Any sort of particulars on that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, we certainly do have that data. I don't have it at my fingertips today. But what I can say is that we are continuing to permit within our established timeframes or standards. We are at immediate risk of not being able to do so, given particularly on our building team, some of the long-term medical absences, where, for example, we only have one plumbing inspector to cover the entire city, in which case we are canceling inspections or delaying those as an example.
Thank you. And then how many folks do we have that are out that we're trying to backfill and to help with the work?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, I'm not sure I totally understand your question. Do you mind rephrasing or repeating?
Happy to do it. So what I've heard you say is that we have some folks that are out for long-term issues, and we've got folks that are burning the midnight oil who are still there. What I'm curious is how many people are currently employed but not able to work because of other issues?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, it's not quite as simple as not being able to work. However, we have, I believe, 4 staff that are currently impacted by medical issues that has them out for extended periods of time.
And those medical issues, oh, follow up, Madam Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Those medical issues, are those positions directly at, or excuse me, let me phrase that. Are the folks that are out in their positions, is the positions that are being asked for directly related to those in which there is a need because we've got folks that need to take care of themselves?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, I think you're asking me how many of the 7 staff we're requesting through the IBC are related to medical absences specifically, and the answer is 2.
Okay, so we have 4 that are out and we're only backfilling 2. What about the other 2?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, I'm not prepared to speak specifically to the scenarios that we're experiencing, and I think that might get us into a little bit of a risky place as far as getting into the specifics there. I will say that as part of our FY27 budget request, we will be coming forward with another request for added capacity to the building team, in part due to this issue. We tried to be particularly prudent about where we have sort of emergency immediate needs.
Thanks. Actually 2 more. When we were approving the modern zoning code, I remember asking Director Keene if a financial analysis had been done on what the department needed. And I believe he said that there hadn't been. Are you suggesting, and Alicia suggesting that that's what you're going to do now, is how to deal with the volume?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willett, so a couple things have happened. One, we had a cost recovery and fee study completed recently by a consultant or in partnership with a consultant. And we are analyzing and reviewing the findings of that study now, sort of in concert with what we're experiencing as far as the volume of our surplus revenue is concerned. And so taking what we learned from that consultant's report or study and using that to inform a recommendation that we hope to bring forward as part of the 27 budget build related to updating our fee schedules, like I was saying, and then two, how that might inform our sustainability plan moving forward, including if we move into, for example, a special revenue fund or an enterprise fund.
Thank you. And then one more just in education. You had mentioned that and I hope I get this right, that at PDS you do the work and then you get the funds. Is that referring to when a building permit is paid for? Talk us through that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willets, I think that's fair. So there's a tremendous amount of work that happens, for example, on the planning side, and then of course into building before building permits are issued, and building permits are paid at issuance.
Thank you. That's all I've got for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions?
Madam Mayor, maybe just a quick comment here.
Yeah.
So there's always a little bit of uncertainty for, I think, council members whenever there's an FTE request. And it's because, one, we're not here every single day. And we're definitely not in the department every single day. So we don't know exactly what's happening, where the shortages are. We can't really feel it and we can't really see it. It's always easy, I think, for us when we have police and fire come to us when they're asking for FTEs, because they have some pretty clear metrics of this is how many people we should have per population to reach different types of insurance goals, a variety of other things. And then it's always a challenge for almost every other department, maybe except for the airport, which seems to, with the Energize Fund, a little bit easier. I think it will be easier for us coming forward in future budget builds as we sort of look into those revenue streams and try to map that out on how that looks a little more sustainable. But I guess I would just encourage PDS and other departments as they're coming to us in this future budget build, trying to figure out those metrics that help us understand like where the need is when we can't see it and feel it on an everyday basis, and sort of what those longer term plans are. I have no doubt that these 7 FTEs are needed right now and are going to be needed into the future. But as we have additional ones come forward, I think having those types of metrics or having those types of predictability within funds is super helpful for us.
Thanks for that comment. Yes.
Yeah, hi. I had a question for Maureen.
Yeah. She's still here. I don't know if you can see her or not, but she's at the podium.
I can see her. Okay. Hi, Maureen. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think, part of it is a struggle in understanding an immediate need when it's 7 FTEs, which seems significant. And understanding, it sounds like we have a pretty increased volume of work that's coming through. And then we also are seeing delays coming through. And I think I would say if we aren't measuring, I guess let me ask you this, are we measuring the time it takes to get through the planning process?
Madam Mayor, Council Member, yes. In fact, I just had in my inbox today kind of the first draft or first report of planning timeframes. Historically, we have tracked that, but not to a similar standard or a similar degree that our building division, for example, does, that does have really clear standards by which we try to finish inspections or plan reviews, for example. So, to Councilmember Halliburton's point, and probably yours as well, it is a little squishier on the planning side. It can be difficult to set really clean standards because for a couple of reasons. One does have to do with the volume, certainly, but more so with the diversity of projects we receive, and some of those are more labor intensive than others. All of that is to say what we've worked on the last handful of months in the planning division is setting some benchmarks, because there's also required timeframes built in, be it for public hearing or noticing or otherwise. So we have set benchmarks and have started to measure, again, we're 2 years into the modern zoning code, what timeframes look like now, and then we can start to pivot towards what they should look like. But to assert what they should look like now is a little premature, which also makes it a bit difficult to deliver, Councilmember Halliburton, on your request regarding kind of a cleaner standard by which we can bring forward to measure against whether or when we need new staff. So long answer, long, Councilmember Corliss. We are measuring that on the planning side and starting to benchmark where those timeframes should be so that we can start to set a clearer level of service standard.
Madam Mayor, follow up. Yeah, Maureen, I know you're very new in this role too, and appreciate it. And I think if I understand correctly, is that it's really hard to set a metric or set the benchmark when we may not have all the metrics today. And I like your direction. I think it is, I guess from my standpoint, what I'd see is the more we can start to measure, be it call volume, types of application through process, number of applications, and start seeing that monthly trend, I think will be very helpful for us so that we can try to get a gauge of that volume. Because as I understand, there's probably no applications that are like one another. There's always some differences. So as much as we can even just start running the metrics, even if we're not putting the benchmarks on them, I think will help us in the future to understand and help plan for these interim budget changes and the increases in staffing and funding.
Sure. And Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, I do want to make clear that in the examples you listed there, we do have and track a lot of that information. My comments were specific to benchmarking the timeframes. And in part that gets complicated because all of these applications happen in partnership, right? There's this back and forth between our planning team and the applicant or developer. And so in between that back and forth is where it gets a little squishier for us as far as setting standards is concerned.
Yeah, understanding you can't say how long someone has maybe answer back to those questions. Yeah, it'd be great to see maybe in a further work session at some point in time the metrics that we do have and to run through those so that we understand the volume increasing through the planning department. One final question, and that is on the expense appropriation of $300,000 for a project to implement design review guidelines. Is this something we are going to outsource and work with a partner on?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, yes, that would be our intention.
Do we have a time frame, Maureen, at this time?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, not at this time.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you. No other questions right now.
Great, thanks. And I'm looking at Jason. The council might enjoy seeing the tracker that you do in terms of what is that? I'm just going to call it the tracker.
Development tracker.
Development tracker.
Yeah.
Just
Madam Mayor,
get a sense of how some of that timing is tracked, and then you'll be back in work session, I think, with that draft when you're further prepared to relate it to other timing.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, we're happy to come back with the types of data that we do track. Josh Wilson is prepared to present a little bit of that today, at least in terms of a year 2 zoning code report. And then we can come back with some information regarding the planning timeframes I mentioned and some of those other data points that Councilmember Corliss in particular mentioned being interested in, including what's within that development tracker. That's no problem.
Great, thank you. Anything further? All right.
Madam Mayor,
Sorry, Lucy, I leaned back so I didn't see that you turned off your mic.
That's okay. I have a few more questions.
Great.
Maureen or Alicia, we didn't go through publicly what we're asking for here. I mean, Mayor, you and I are both having problems with our words today. Councilmember Corliss asked about a specific line item that's in there. Can you talk to us about the other line items that aren't FTEs? Walk us through those.
and Madam Mayor, can I jump in about the design review request? So for the rest of council, I'd been interested for a couple of years now in reviewing, as we did the zoning code, review some of the guidelines that we have around design and historic to be sure that they're modernized to, current standards or materials that are used and approved, things like that, just to make sure that it's something that's recently also been reviewed. So in regards to specifically the design review consultant fee, that's part of that work. It's been on the kind of the long-term prioritization for the PDS team. And I remember, when they came to us at one point, maybe last year, with like, some of these projects are going to take years to accomplish this. That speaks to just that one design review piece. But I'm looking at Lucy in my TV, but she's up here. So anyway, just to clarify that one, kind of where the origin of that came from. But I'm sure Maureen can add some context to that as well.
And
Madam
Maureen,
Mayor.
I think you can just read into the record the other requests.
Okay, Madam Mayor, council, so $150,000 for more outsourced plan review. This would be to supplement staff capacity during peak workload periods and maintain review timelines. As we just discussed, $300,000 to implement design review guidelines, which are outdated and need updating to make them more usable by the design review committee and the public. $100,000 to fund a redesign of an updated and improved PDS webpage. And I'll just editorialize quickly here to say that we've received a tremendous amount of customer feedback that our web pages are not customer friendly. And then $100,000 for comprehensive planning work to support future city growth. $85,000 for furniture and workspace reconfiguration costs, giving the staff that we hope to add. And then $250,000 for design work related to a remodel of the second floor PDS work area. The purpose of this is twofold: one, to increase workplace safety, and then two, to improve our customer service.
All right. Anything further? I'll take a motion.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the interim budget changes as presented by staff.
Madam Mayor, I'll second.
We have a motion and second. Discussion.
Madam Mayor, I just to speak quickly to the FTEs, Councilmember Halliburton and I were in a meeting yesterday, unrelated, but anecdotally, somebody happened to mention to us that it was getting difficult to do business at the city of Boise, that the building permits had taken longer than he expected to receive. And it was really nice to say, tomorrow we're addressing that with this IBC. So I appreciate the staff's action to the what I believe is a community request and need for us to be more customer facing and customer forward with this. So I appreciate that response.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
couple comments. Thank you, Maureen and Alicia. I know you've had some big lifts lately. This is a hard one for us as council, because for me personally, I certainly want the department to have what it needs. And we do hear often that things are slower than people would like, and time is money in an inflationary market. What I'm struggling with is I don't feel like I have a quantification of how this will actually improve things. It almost seems like there was a number available and then the request matched that number. And so I'm really struggling with that, because I would have preferred that we had some more metrics to align to this. What I would hope is that if we hire 7 people, the time goes down, and I don't, for what needs to happen, I'm not getting the sense that that's a guarantee.
All right. Further comments?
Yeah, really quick, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Maureen, for bringing this forward. We need to be responsive to our public, and if our response time is slowing, we need to do what we can to make sure that we can keep business flowing for our community, including our developers, our planning, our inspections. I thank you for bringing this forward and for answering the plethora of questions today. I think maybe as mentioned, just having those metrics going forward so we can clearly see where that need is at, to make it a little bit easier to move these forward. I will be voting in support of this today, and appreciate again you guys bringing this forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your comments, Clerk. Halliburton.
Yes.
Morales,
Yes.
Nash,
Yes.
Stead,
Yes.
Willett,
No.
Corliss.
Yes.
Okay, great,
Wait,
thanks.
five in
I could see you saying yes, but you were muted.
5 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Thank you. And now, thanks, thank you both for being here. Appreciate it. Oh, Maureen, you're staying up here, and Josh is joining
Yes.
to provide a year 2 zoning code report.
Yes, so Mayor, Council, I'm just going to tee up our agenda. We actually have 3 presentations for you, and we're going to kind
You're
of
just going to put them all together?
Yeah, we'll just go back to back to back, but I'm
Great.
gonna
Okay.
just tee them up briefly because we put together or hopes to put together a work session like this because these presentations really do build on each other, and furthermore build on the work session that we had on January 27th regarding foothills and expansion areas of the city. So again, what that is going to look like today then is a year 2 report out on the zoning code from Josh Wilson, sort of early indications of its performance in light of the goals we have. Then Deanna Dupuy, our long range planning manager in PDS, will walk you through some initial high level findings from a housing capacity analysis that we are finalizing now. This analysis is really getting at what's possible regarding housing within current city limits and within our AOI. So it's not asserting what is to come or will be, but what's possible. And then Melinda McGoldrick, our senior manager in HCD, will have an update for you on where we are in relation to our affordable housing goals and all the levers that we're pulling in terms of trying to bring more affordability online. And then forgive me, I don't think I've been before you in the handful of months that I've been director without showing you this slide, but I included it again just briefly here because I want to continue to underpin the work we're doing with the questions that we're seeking to answer and bring forward to you. And so the questions to sort of keep in mind during today's series of presentations is what is possible within city limits to achieve these goals and how do we enable that? Where might we expand in service of these goals and in what ways? And then how are we responding to the demand we have for housing now? And with that, I will turn it over to Josh.
And just for a time check, we've got 20 minutes less than planned, so we've got till 5:30.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Thank you, Maureen. As she mentioned, I am here today to discuss some results from the past year with the modern zoning code, look at some data in terms of housing units produced, number of applications, and also some information about where those projects are being approved. So yeah, this data is from January to December of 2025 and is only for approved projects. The vast majority of these projects have not been constructed and have only been through the planning process. And I'll just point out that while we can't yet establish long-term trends, we are seeing some directions that things are pointing in, and that data is encouraging. I think Councilmember Corliss had a crystal ball because one of the first things I'm going to talk about here is number of calls and volume. So one of the approaches we are taking in planning is to develop more robust tracking of metrics, specifically the volume of work that we're producing, and then we can feed that into our timelines and how those are affected. So the overall or overarching theme here is that volume remains incredibly busy in the planning department. With over 1,100 PLNs received. PLNs are the first step in the application process, that pre-submittal work that the applicant undertakes with our planning team in order to come in the door and submit applications, which then directly feeds, of course, into all of our hearing bodies and ultimately into the building department. 12,295 development tracker visits. The Development Tracker is a website that citizens can sign up for to be notified of applications as they are begun in the process. They can sign up for specific geographic areas in the city to be notified, so they have an increased visibility on projects coming in their area. And we'll talk certainly more about this, but 1,962 housing units approved and 1,558,017 square feet of non-residential square footage. Additionally, We have, through the planning processes, required 1,979 trees to be planted, 5.5 miles of new sidewalk, and over 2,700 bicycle parking spaces. Again, I'll point out that these are numbers that have gone through the planning entitlements and not necessarily built yet, but they will be in the future. Moving into housing supply, again, trying to take a look back at previous years, compare them to current volumes, noticing that after a slight decrease in 2024, 2025 did pick back up in volume. I'll also point out that these numbers do vary through influences certainly outside of the zoning code and any zoning application processes. Things like the economy and the strength of the housing market will drive the numbers of housing units built and applied for. And you can see that in past years having a higher volume. But we are encouraged in the direction that this data is heading again, 1,962 units approved through planning, and subsequently 1,272 building permits issued. Those building permits do tend to lag behind the planning approvals by some number of months just due to the nature of that work.
Madam Mayor, quick question for Josh.
Yes,
Yep.
go ahead.
Josh, how would you categorize a building permit for something that was a remodel? Like someone needs to put in new windows and a new door in a home.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, that would not be included in the new unit approval. That would be a minor permit that would not be considered in this number on the screen.
So the building permits issues would not include something like that?
It would not.
Okay, thank you.
More specifically, looking at the housing supply in terms of zones, breaking it out individually where those 1,900 housing units were provided. We see large increases, and I'll also take this opportunity to point out that when we're looking at a single year, these numbers can be heavily influenced by single projects. The MX5 number that you see there, none in 2024 and 538 in 2025. That's literally a couple of apartment buildings. So looking at long-term data and long-term goals is our strategy, certainly, but we can glean some insights by looking at these specific numbers for the last 2 years. A heavy increase in R1C, again, driven by a couple of large single-family subdivisions that can heavily influence those areas. I will point out the R3, you will notice a very small number of units last year in the R3. That is our high density residential district. That accounts for a very small amount of land within the city. So again, can be heavily influenced by 1 or 2 projects, and none happened to come through in 2025. Housing supply based on review authority. There are some trends here as well. I think, across the board, we are up, which would be consistent with the overall number of housing units produced. Couple of things. The Planning and Zoning Commission, if we were to take these numbers back further than 2024, would have certainly had a high number of units that was reviewed and approved by that body. With the adoption of the new zoning code, more of that responsibility was abdicated to the Design Review Commission. So you see those numbers higher. The city council numbers from last year were certainly up due to the fact that it's usually subdivisions that come through council to be approved, and those do take a pretty long amount of time. So most of those didn't get through the process in 2024. We had an influx in 2025. Again, it will be interesting to see where these trends track over the following years as we are well into the zoning code and these things have worked through the process fully. Housing diversity, again, following the same trends as the other categories up across the board. Large multifamily can again be influenced by just a couple of very large projects, and we have certainly had fortunately some very significant multifamily projects come through in the last year. There have been some great additions. So you do see a large increase there in the large multifamily. The other, I would say that the other categories have been largely similar to previous years. Accessory dwelling units is another interesting data point that has some explanation behind the numbers. When the regulations and the hurdles to get an accessory dwelling unit approved were reduced with the new zoning code, saw a pretty massive influx of those in 2024. Folks that had been waiting on those restrictions to be lifted, immediately applied. Saw 130 of those in 2024. We feel like, and again, the data will either prove this or not, but we feel like the 82 that were approved in 2025 is probably the new benchmark moving forward, with the caveat that we certainly have some modifications to the accessory dwelling unit standards coming through in a new zoning ordinance amendment that you all will see soon. And that could increase that number again with some further allowances for accessory dwelling units. So it does remain to be seen what the new normal is for ADUs, but certainly elevated from previous years and the previous average. Another aspect that we are tracking is the zoning code's influence on where development is focused. A theme in the modern zoning code, and you've heard us say this over and over, is to direct development where there is existing public investment and infrastructure. So we do that by focusing on some key areas. That's the downtown planning area. It's our best-in-class transit routes, State Street, Vista, and Fairview. It's regional and community activity centers that are identified in Blueprint Boise, and it's mixed-use zones. And I'll speak more specifically about each one of those in the following slides, starting with downtown. The downtown planning area saw 325 new housing units, which accounted for 17% of all new units within the city. On top of that, the best-in-class transit, those three corridors that I identified, Fairview, Vista, and State, accounted for 40% of all housing units being within 1/4 mile of best-in-class transit, which is that easy walking distance that we used as a metric in the new zoning code. Within the 1/4 mile of our community and regional activity centers, saw another 134 housing units, which accounted for 7% of all of the housing produced. And then the other mixed-use zones identified there on the map in red. Again, a fairly small footprint within the city in terms of overall land area, accounted for another 3% or 60 units. And the end result of all of those is that 65% of all housing units in 2025 were produced in the areas that we focused development to through the new zoning code, which I think is a testament to its success. Non-residential development remains strong, certainly. Again, that on the first slide, and of course, this is a lot of numbers and a lot of graphs, and happy to go back and point out anything towards the end or at any point. But that 1.5 million square feet of commercial, a full third of that was provided within those key development areas as well that we have identified as being important. Infrastructure and public safety. So this is housing within fire response areas. 79% of all new housing units were produced within fire response areas for 1,552 units.
Madam Mayor, sorry, Josh, can I just interject really quick? So I imagine, or maybe can you explain what the fire response area is? Does that mean that outside of that pink, those units would not be serviced at all, or it's below standard? Can you just clarify what that is?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor, Council President Stead. So it is not that they are outside of any sort of fire service. They would certainly have fire protection. It's that they are outside of the existing response times and response areas. So certainly could be covered by cooperative agreements or by Boise City Fire, but outside of those targeted goals. And a lot of these, a high number of what you're seeing here, that 21% that is not within the response areas is actually one development. So again, easily these single year numbers can be easily skewed by single developments. So we look for longer term trends in order to really get a full picture of what's happening.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, if we could go back to that slide. Yeah, thank you. Just thanks, Josh, for this. Can you explain, is there a difference in the pink areas? The light to the dark?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, off the top of my head, no, but I can get that information for you by the end of the presentation.
Okay, that's fine. And Madam Mayor, Josh, another question, just when we're talking about fire response, is that goal 4-minute response time or 5-minute response time?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, again, I will confirm that and get that for you by the end of the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Another metric that was measured is housing units produced within a 10-minute walk to a park. Very similar to the fire response. 80% of all new units, or 1,574, were provided within that walking distance. Looking at sensitive lands, so this is airport, hillside, wildland and urban interface, or WUI, and floodplain. These are areas, contrary to the previous slides, that we want to direct development away from, of certain types. So housing units, only 104 new ones within those sensitive lands, or 5.3% of all housing units. Moving into some more statistics and moving away from the focus areas, in terms of trees and sustainable and resilient development, again, 1,979 trees were required through development applications. That's 524 evergreen, 1,455 deciduous, and then $138,560 was added to the tree mitigation fund, which of course will go to fund the planting of even more trees. Related to focusing development in the areas that have existing infrastructure and best-in-class transit routes, we have proximity to transit. 94% of all units were within 1/4 mile of a bus stop. We have 1,738 units adjacent to a pathway identified on the Pathways Master Plan, and 9,814 feet of pathway will be required to be built with development. Public sidewalk along right-of-ways, 5.45 miles of new sidewalk was approved in 2025.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Josh, on that last slide, for the pathways, are these are not necessarily developed pathways. Is that correct? Just even if it's just identified but not currently a pathway today?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, that there will be a few things captured within that number. It will be very small developments that were not required to build the pathway, but were required to provide an easement, would be captured in that number. And then pathways that will be built as part of the development but has not been built yet is also captured within that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, since we're stopped here
Yes.
real quick, super interesting on this, Josh, and super interesting on the last slide with the trees. It would be really cool to know if we could figure out what a dollar value was for some of this infrastructure, whether it was the sidewalks or the pathways, or even with transit, when we have a development that comes in, they have to install a bus stop, those types of things. Because I do think that is a really interesting point that we don't always capture, of like, yes, it's building these things, but actually how much funding is it creating for the city that we would have had to have used, taxpayer dollars for otherwise. So really love seeing this. And that would be some extra information that would be helpful.
Absolutely appreciate that. And then also related to transportation choice, and highlighted in the beginning of the presentation, 2,741 bicycle parking spaces have been approved, with a little over 1,800 long-term and 879 short-term spaces. Vehicle parking, we did receive and approve 8 reduction requests. And then residential projects had 43 projects that provided more than required. And largely, we do have parking maximums, so they did work within those. But largely, when projects provide more parking than is required, it's certainly market driven and customer driven, client driven. Finally, I'll highlight the economic opportunity. So large local and small scale commercial. We had 6 neighborhood cafes that were approved, 17,000, a little over square feet in 17 small retail spaces, and then 54,000 square feet in 15 medium retail spaces. 5 home occupations that do require a permit, and not all home occupations do. And then over 1 million square feet within our industrial zones that was encompassed by 16 different projects. So I think some takeaways, and again, we're still working on developing some long-term trend tracking, but we can see some early indications of what this data is showing, is that approved housing units have increased over 2025 increased over 2024, seeing a positive direction in that trend. Development is being directed to key focus areas, and I think that was really highlighted some of those percentages when we took a look at that we are seeing development on best-in-class transit routes, activity centers in downtown, and areas with existing infrastructure investment is where development is being focused. Sensitive lands are being protected: the airport, the hillside, and the WUI, and the floodplain. Transportation choices are increasing with a lot of bike parking, proximity to transit, and new sidewalks being provided through development. And then finally, enabling economic opportunity. A substantial amount of non-residential square footage has been approved through the planning and entitlement processes this last year. Certainly anticipate that trend to continue. I think these numbers, hopefully, I think I can say that with a straight face. Next year, when we come back, these will be increased significantly. Development trends are all up. Our department is incredibly busy, and we are still working on process improvements, edits to the zoning code. You'll see one shortly here in March. Continue to kind of hone our processes, work on efficiency, work on customer service, and implementing the goals and policies that the zoning code promoted. And with that, I would stand for any questions, or I can turn it over to Deanna.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Josh. This information is really interesting and valuable. I appreciate taking the time to bring it to us. I wonder if you can, 2 kind of housekeeping questions. Can you please share this presentation with us? I'd love to dig in a little bit more. And then I think along those lines, for me, I think for other council members too, if there's ever a chance that we could receive this content in advance of the meeting, I think would be really helpful. Especially, it's so data heavy, and I really want to give it great attention, and it's kind of hard to digest it all, I guess, in this format. It'd be really helpful to have received it in advance, even a day or 2, so that we have the opportunity to come with questions prepared based on the data we're reviewing.
Yeah,
Madam
Madam
Mayor?
Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, why don't I go with Corliss and then Halliburton?
Okay. All right. Josh, we should have had you up first. May have took some of those questions off of Maureen. A couple of questions in back a few slides. I want to say it's number like slide 3 or 4. We were doing a trend of, I believe, applications from 2021 through 2025. Yes, that's it. Thank you. So it looks like in 2022, we had quite a bit of, are those housing units, the 3,737?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, correct. Yes, that was 3,700 housing units.
I hate to ask this because I don't know. I know I can't hardly recall anything by memory, but were those, it seemed like a pretty big year for us. Was that kind of an outlier year?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Close, yes, we did have a number of years in the early 2020s where we saw a And this is just me speaking from experience anecdotally, but we did see a very high volume of multifamily development during those years.
Yeah, that seemed to make sense. And that's what I was wondering too, because even though it's a large number of housing units, when I think about staffing and everything as well, they may not, the volume of applications may not be there. It's the breadth of that application being so a large housing unit. And then the next slide forward, Josh. Oh, sorry, one more. That's not it either. We were showing how many go through different types of reviews. There was one back. There we go. Admin review looks like we saw a pretty significant increase. I think about what we just approved for staffing. Will this also help with those admin review applications, which I know is something we wanted to see within our zoning code?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, absolutely. So in the new zoning code, a lot of applications that previously would have gone to a hearing body moved to an administrative approval. Multifamily less than 50 units is an administrative design review. So that has certainly put an increased burden on that team.
Okay. Yeah, it looked pretty significant for that volume there. And I imagine that was fairly taxing to the team and it probably will continue. Do you believe that number will remain pretty constant, you think there?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Close, I do. I anticipate that number will remain elevated just due to the fact, again, that those reviews have changed in who issues the approval. And I think we have some changes moving forward that we will see even more accessory units, which are an administrative approval. So I think that number could even significantly increase.
Yeah, I imagine so. Josh, thank you. This was a wealth of information. And then just want to echo Council President Stead's comment that it'd be great to see this a day or two ahead, just so we have time to digest some of this great information. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I'm
Yes.
glad that Councilmember Corliss got us to this slide because I think this is maybe one of the more interesting slides for me as well. I'm excited to see that increase in the administrative approval. That was one of the major goals with the plan.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's something that we continue to see go up, especially when we're talking a lot about our missing middle, our ADUs, our smaller developments, those types of things that we really just want to see, I think, move through as quickly as possible and giving our team the tools and the resources to do that. I was a little surprised with the city council one because I thought that would go down, but it makes sense with the subdivisions why we're there. And I was also a little surprised with the hearing examiner that there were so few. I thought that maybe we'd have quite a bit more there as well, but just kind of wanted to, raise that point of, I'm glad to see this is a direction that we're heading with that administrative review. I hope that that's something that continues to grow, especially with those missing middles, and that we give you the resources to do that. So thanks for sharing this one. It would be interesting to see the amount of rezones compared to the past, because that does come up a lot in our meetings. And with the modern zoning code, if we've seen kind of a sign of that more predictable development pattern of less rezones because, we have made some changes, or if we're still, seeing about the same amount. Okay.
Thanks, Josh.
Absolutely.
That's the only one. Was it a lot of work?
You doing what we were?
Madam Mayor, council members, for the record, it's Deanna Dupuis, and I'm here today to present the results of the housing capacity analysis. This is a first of its kind study for Boise that looked at how our new zoning code affects long-term housing capacity and how the market is likely to respond in the near term. We partnered with BAE, which was the consulting firm who helped us previously with the analysis of our zoning incentives, to help answer some key questions. First, under the modern zoning code, how much housing could realistically be built? Where would that housing be located? And are there any barriers that would slow housing delivery? As I'll show today, the study indicates that our policy actions have unlocked meaningful new housing capacity. But I want to emphasize, as Maureen did earlier, the numbers you see are not predictions or absolute. They show what is possible under our current zoning code and market conditions. We'll use these findings to refine our housing strategy and our work plan. But ultimately, the takeaway is encouraging. Boise is not full, and market conditions indicate that we have potential for significant amounts of new housing. With this context, I'll walk you through what we learned. This study looks at land both within city limits and our area of impact. And to refine our analysis, the consultant broke the city into 14 subsections or subareas. They're largely aligned with the comprehensive planning areas, with a few refinements to the edges of our city to more closely match market demand areas. Our consultant then created a GIS parcel database that identified vacant land and sites that are sometimes referred to as underutilized. But we further refined this by excluding sites that don't have any more room for another unit. So we're looking at net sites with possibility for new housing. From there, the consultant established some density assumptions based on what is permitted through the modern zoning code. Under the long-term build-out scenario, the study estimates that we have capacity for about 162,000 additional housing units across 15,000 parcels. And for context, Compass forecasts project about 43,000 new households between 2020 and 2050. The long-term zoning capacity is nearly 4 times the projected housing growth. So from a land use and zoning standpoint, Boise has significant room to grow within its existing planning boundaries, but this includes the area of impact. But that's not the full story. Next, we sought to understand market demand and feasibility, basically where different housing is most likely to succeed financially. The consultants looked at common housing types, apartments, townhomes, and single-family homes. And then they asked, in each part of the city, what type of housing makes sense right now? They based this on 4 market trends. First, they looked at where housing has been built over the last 15 years. If an area has been growing, they assume that it's reasonable to believe that the market is active and willing to invest there. Second, they looked at what type of housing already exists in each area. If a neighborhood already has a lot of townhomes or apartments, that usually means there's demand for that type of housing. Third, they looked at how prices and rents have changed over time. Rising prices and rents signal stronger demand for housing in a certain area. And finally, they looked at today's prices and rents. Higher values generally mean projects are more likely to pencil. When you combine those 4 factors, it helps us move from just what zoning allows to what is likely to get built given the zoning and the market. So this slide shows how those 2 things come together. We started with the land that could support more housing. That's our available sites. Then we layered in that market demand I just talked about, and that's the feasibility by area and housing type. And you put those together and you get the near-term housing capacity. This represents where housing is most likely to be built over the next 10 to 15 years. So by combining available sites with market demand, we get the near-term housing capacity map, which shows that we could theoretically accommodate 67,000 homes. Again, this is not an absolute number, but shows what is possible under today's zoning and market assumptions. However, some of these sites will develop quickly, but others will take decades to do so, and some might not change at all. That's why it's important to look beyond the total number and focus where this capacity is located and how realistic it is. Most housing units are expected to be developed via multifamily product, as this is a very efficient way to deliver units. You saw that through Josh's presentation. And allowing multifamily by right in commercial areas was a key part of the zoning code framework. But there's still opportunity and demand for compact and suburban housing products, making up just under 50% of our capacity. Additionally, we have a good amount of capacity, about 10%, within our specific plan areas. Most of the 7,000 units are with Locale and Murillo farms. I do want to put a caveat on the specific plans that sometimes specific plans may be perceived as locked up, or really the issue here is that the pace of construction is set by the developer. When we looked at the build out of Harris Ranch, we have about 16 years of building permit data. And on average, Harris Ranch only permitted 100 units per year. And with the most units in a single year being permitted in 2021, which was 263 units, which was 11 years after their first building permit was issued in Harris Ranch. Next, it's important to look at where that capacity is located. The most capacity exists in downtown, as well as significant percentages located in areas where we've been consistently planning for density, like along Fairview, State Street, and the mall area in the inner West Bench. In the last real estate cycle, we've seen a lot of development downtown, as Josh just mentioned, and the study shows that we have even more capacity downtown. However, some of this capacity may be locked up because they have owners where development is not an immediate priority. Think of big box sites with large underutilized parking lots, such as the Winco downtown, the Town Square Mall, or certain auto dealerships. These represent huge opportunities in areas that are close to services, and there's demand for that housing there. So policy that motivates property owners in these areas can be key to unlock housing at scale within the city.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
while Deanna takes a breath, Deanna, I want to clarify that this analysis was done based on what's bare land, not what something that would be redeveloped or torn down.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willits, I actually have a slide to show the difference. We are looking at both vacant land and land that is what economists would say underutilized, where the land value is greater than the structure value. And we also then further looked at it, looking at, can you add another unit to that property? So not to displace existing properties, but could we find room to increase housing on that property?
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Deanna. A quick question on the map. So if we'll just take high density, and if we're looking at the blue dots, can you tell me the difference between the smaller blue dots and the larger dots?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, that's a good question, and I know it's not clear. There's a lot of information on this slide. The larger dots is just more housing units, so it's typically associated with a larger parcel, so you could fit more housing units on that. So it scales up.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Dina, on this, what is this iron wall on Maple Grove Road?
Oh, yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay.
I have some notes on it. I'll just speak before I'm reading my full notes. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash. So this is, like I said, there's a ton of information. So when you look at how we found near-term capacity, we said available sites times market demand. Our consultant used these geographies to identify market strength. So the iron wall you're seeing on inner West Bench to outer West Bench, that's a big area. And they assumed, and their data showed, there's kind of a market difference in demand for housing and pricing they had to pick a geography, but they picked Maple Grove. I believe that's Maple Grove.
It wasn't a specific thing.
And I'll get to exactly why we're seeing the difference on either side. I'll just get to that now. But you'll notice limited expected growth on the outer West Bench compared to the inner West Bench or areas on the central bench. We kind of have a couple of pieces happening here. One has to do with land pattern. And these are newer subdivisions with often larger houses on medium-sized lots that may not have capacity to add another unit, or CC&Rs prohibit kind of increases in densities. We also, through some of the market analysis, and I can get more into detail with this, but our consultant identified that in the outer West Bench, there's been relatively limited new housing, as that was one of their market trends, looking at increases in housing indicating a stronger market. That far West Bench has seen, relative to the rest of the city, less increases in housing and more stable prices. So an increase in prices indicate kind of unmet demand, and that hasn't happened on that outer West Bench to the same degree as the rest of the city. But we are expecting to see compact development largely in those inner near neighborhoods. And these are likely because they're adaptable and suitable for infill. We have vacant lots or large lots with small homes and typically on gridded streets or with alleys. And we expect this would continue to be feasible to add density in these areas, either through adding ADUs, or replacing one house with potentially 3 or 4 skinny homes, townhomes, or a small apartment building. Often, and our consultant confirmed this, we're seeing a development pattern moving from just 4 units per acre to 8 to 12 units per acre.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
quick question. You mentioned HOA restrictions that may restrict ADUs. Do we know if those CCNRs will apply the same to junior ADUs?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Morales, I think they're all a little bit different, so I can't speak for all CCNRs generally, and I'm not 100% familiar what's in the state law that prohibited HOAs from prohibiting ADUs. And then I just want to touch quickly on Southwest and the outer Southeast. You'll see that we have capacity in both areas, but they're split between what's within city limits and what's outside of city limits. The outer or the Southwest, that also includes that 10 Mile Creek planning area that's in Blueprint Boise. I want to just one more time highlight Locale and Murillo Farms being able to accommodate 9% of the housing capacity. And then when we look at the outer Southeast, that's again split within city limits, which is East Columbia, where there is potentially some demand for ADU development and opportunity to do that. We haven't actually seen an ADU approved there in recent data, so that could be something as an opportunity. And then, of course, the large vacant parcels on the edge of the city near Micron as ability to accommodate quite a bit of capacity. And so this understanding of market capacity can help inform future expansion planning, as well as understand trade-offs as it relates to investments within city limits and where we expect more housing to be located. And this is to Councilmember Willett's question around vacant land. About 72% of the near-term capacity is on vacant land, and 28% is on sites able to accommodate more housing. This distinction matters because vacant land is generally faster, less risky, and less expensive to develop. When we look at the map, we see large clusters of vacant land just outside city limits. These are large sites that are attractive because they promise a lot of housing with fewer obstacles for the developer. Within the city, we also have vacant land, primarily downtown and Fairview, as I've mentioned, and some small sites scattered in existing neighborhoods. But there is a lot of potential on already developed sites, whether it's full sale redevelopment or additional housing units through ADUs or cottage clusters. Redevelopment nodes. Yes.
Let Deanna take another breath. Deanna, can you explain how tax exempt vacant land is accounted for in this?
Yeah. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willett, I have a full slide on that.
Oh, okay. You're reading everybody's minds. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But the parcels are colored here as well, but I have a slide that talks specifically about tax exempt. Redevelopment, to say, typically does have higher construction costs and therefore sometimes requires stronger market conditions to make that work. So as a result, the market kind of naturally gravitates towards vacant land first, which really helps explain the ongoing development pressure we've been feeling, even with an updated zoning code that allowed a lot of infill development. So as I said, the city took the first step to reduce barriers to infill development through the modern zoning code to enable more neighborhood scale development. And in addition, historically, the city has used tools like urban renewal districts to further help offset barriers to redevelopment, especially as it relates to construction costs and infrastructure upgrades. Examples include CCDC's investments in downtown and the planned work along State Street. These tools have been important in making infill and redevelopment as more competitive with edge development. This map builds off of the previous slide and highlights the properties that are in existing city limits. We have about 75% of our capacity located in city limits. So in theory, most future housing is planned to be in our existing city limits. However, that capacity is spread across over 4,000 individual sites compared to just 570 sites outside of our city limits. And for example, with only 28 parcels in the outer Southeast, we have potential for nearly 8,000 units. In other words, inside the city, growth is fragmented across many smaller properties. Outside the city, it's concentrated on fewer, larger sites that are often easier to activate in the short run. But an important distinction here is infrastructure, which we talked about 2 weeks ago at work session. Within the city, most of the sites have already have roads, sewer, fire, parks, and transit in place. That infrastructure has been built and paid out over decades. At the urban edge, infrastructure does not yet exist. New development requires investments in services. And to address these limitations, the city has often put conditions on development approvals to delay when housing actually gets built. For an example, the recently approved Mario Farms, City Council placed conditions of approval that required contributing financially to the city and limiting development to a certain phase until Lake Hazel or a new fire station is built. And this is to your question, Councilmember Willits, who owns the property does make a difference. About 79% of potential units are on privately owned land. This means that housing delivery depends on market conditions and when or if an individual property owner chooses to develop. And what stands out in this analysis is that a relatively small number of publicly owned parcels represent more than 20% of our total housing capacity. Partnering to develop housing on publicly owned land is not new to Boise. This has been a core strategy of our housing team through the Housing Land Trust. But looking at other publicly owned parcels, we see that just 25 state-owned parcels account for nearly 10,000 potential units, largely concentrated on I-D and the former HP campuses. These sites are in prime locations, near services, close to transit, and with access to the Greenbelt. From a planning perspective, these are exactly the kinds of places where higher density housing and more housing in general make sense. At this time, the state's not actively pursuing housing development on these properties, and as such, capacity remains unrealized. We also see opportunity with nonprofit landowners, including faith-based organizations where housing could be added without displacing existing operations. We looked at individual properties to see if we could make that work. You can see these properties in red, and they're located in all areas of the city. Partnership with public and nonprofits. If we were to expand these partnerships, this would be one of the fastest ways to deliver housing at scale within city limits. It also would allow us to advance affordability, transit, and infill goals at the same time.
I just want to jump in here just to be very clear, the difference that we see between publicly owned land and public land.
Correct.
So we have seen nationally the use of housing as a way to sell off public land, which is land, as Westerners know, that we access for recreation, hunting, other things. We will not do that in Boise. This is publicly owned land. It's underutilized, but it is not public lands as Boise sees them.
Madam Mayor, since you're paused for a moment here, Janet, I had a question about existing infrastructure. I guess was in any of these numbers, was there consideration to like where we have I know that you mentioned transit and pathways and stuff, but like where we have road capacity, or if there are other, is it just, I don't know, infrastructure within our control, like the pathways and things like that, or were there other outside factors taken into the analysis?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Stead, I don't have that. I think that's a really great consideration, which is my next slide. We have not limited where that, like, we have not reduced it based off of road capacity or whatnot in these numbers. So, but I do think, and that moves us here, that's a really important thing to consider, constraints to these numbers. So as I've said, we do have capacity, meaningful housing capacity within the city, but this doesn't necessarily predict that that capacity will actually lead to construction. Every project sits at that intersection of policy, market forces, and just practical constraints. Some of these things the city can directly influence. For example, and we've been doing this for years now, zoning, permitting timelines, infrastructure planning, and then incentives. However, others require partnership. Who owns the land? What's the parcel size? What are CC&Rs, construction costs, financing, all those other pieces that go into making housing a reality. So it's not, housing delivery is not just tied to allowed density. but it is about removing barriers and being realistic where we can do that and where we can't. So I'll close with takeaways that will hopefully inform our team's future strategies around infill growth and kind of any other types of policies for housing. But Boise has housing capacity, but that doesn't build homes by itself. We need different approaches in different places, and we need to bring partners along the way. In established neighborhoods, success means making infill easier and more attractive and more competitive. And in growth areas, success means planning ahead and being realistic about timelines and costs, as well as evaluating how that fits into other citywide goals. We look forward to incorporating these findings as we consider future edits to the zoning code, coordinate with other cities for investment decisions, and as we progress our long-term planning work. With that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Deanna, I just want to say before I take questions that this is so well done. Like, this is best in class analysis of the opportunity that we have in this city to create homes for more people in partnership, as you well said, with the market. This is really wonderful to see and exciting, especially for to have these takeaways so that we can think from a policy perspective of what we can do to remove barriers, from a partnership perspective, what new players we ought to approach and bring to the table. You brought up financing. I'd like to look more into that. This is just really great. I will ask you to change under partnership large public land holdings to publicly owned land. Like, we got to make sure that it's clear that we're not buying into the effort to sell off public lands that the public treasures so dearly, but these are underutilized, often parking lots, other things.
Correct.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Deanna, could you go back to the slide with the purple and blue dots? Yeah. I think what I'd probably need to do is see like a parcel level analysis to get an idea if like this passes a gut check of whether or not this type of redevelopment is realistic within the neighborhoods that I'm familiar with. I think what I'm getting at here is our housing inventory goals. I want to make sure that I really want to test how realistic they are. And I think like understanding some of this like at a parcel level about is redevelopment even possible? And if it is possible, is it even the type of redevelopment that we want to see in our neighborhoods? I think that would be important for me to have like a high level of confidence in the number of units that we could realistically bring on. So I guess what are your next steps as far as maybe like digging in, like to see how realistic you had that slide with all those constraints that exist, how realistic some of that is? Because I think one thing I would not want members of my district to take away is that there is a stated goal to remake what their neighborhoods might look like now. Because that was kind of when we sold the modern zoning code to folks, I guess my thing was there's going to be housing that we'd like to see in places where it doesn't exist yet, but the financial likelihood of mass redevelopment in our neighborhoods is probably not realistic. And I think that's kind of borne out, and people have kind of maybe calmed down about that a little bit. So could you just maybe speak to some of those concerns and how will probably approach some of those constraints we might run into?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, I first want to say we have spent time looking at each of these parcels from a what's realistic perspective. I do want to flag that the purple dots, those represent opportunities to add a new unit based off of the zoning code, but specifically
like an ADU,
exactly,
or a junior ADU. That's what you mean. And I want to be clear, we haven't set this number as a goal. And this was the exercise of looking at what might be.
Yeah.
What if the market responded and homeowners responded, what could be possible?
I think, yeah, exactly, Madam Mayor. I was going to say this represents parcels where folks could, through our efforts to reduce barriers to creating ADUs, could add ADUs on them. It is, individual parcels and individual property owners deciding to do it, which I think is one of the biggest constraints. And if we want to add neighborhood scale housing, it is about how can we reduce barriers, which we're doing through the zoning code, which we've been directed by this council, as well as working with property owners to see if they want to do that. But it's obviously their choice to do this. So
Did you have a slide on here that showed the count of housing types, like based on a map like this?
And Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, so that compact piece, that's where those purple dots are coming in. And again, it's more about the kind of degree where it's located, the scale. But there's demand, and we're seeing that being borne out through increases in prices. We're seeing it being borne out in people trying to develop. So this is if the market could meet all those constraints, of course.
Do we have any idea of those three categories, how many units we're approving a year right now?
Could we get Josh back up? Madam Mayor, I could get you those numbers. We just discussed how many units were built, multifamily units were approved last year.
Because like I see this, and it would not surprise me if we could do thousands, if not tens of thousands of high density units, maybe hundreds, if not lower thousands of suburban units. But compact, I would love to see those grow, but I think that's probably in the tens and hundreds of units. So I think that would just give me a better level of confidence in what like the market has tolerated and where that could take us with our goals.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Deanna, this is a lot of really fascinating information. Thank you so much for breaking it down. May we get a copy of the actual consultant's report so we can dig in?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, we are working on finalizing it, but we'll share as soon as it's ready to send.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm just curious how much of this analysis you can repurpose in looking at future improvements to the modern zoning code, or how things would change this analysis. So, like for example, if the minimum lot size was a different number, or potentially if townhomes were easier to build, like the compact picture. How much will this analysis be able to help your team kind of with those kinds of questions going forward?
Would you like her to drill down into single stair stuff too?
Madam Mayor, thank you for bringing that up. That's, I think that's a bigger conversation than probably you guys can handle right now. But
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Morales, yes, we're trying to work with our consultant to make this as adaptable as possible, so that it's honestly one enormous Excel spreadsheet of every parcel that they've gone through and assessed different pieces, assigned market scores. So I think we can make it adaptable as things change. Of course, they looked at the market analysis in the last year. I think they would have to do another study if we do this in 5 years.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Deanna, thank you so much. This is wonderful information, and I'm excited to see this more and dive into it. I want to bring up one area. I know within District 3, a lot of it that was brought up was some suburban, and from what I see in my area, what I hear from people, absolutely, there's a lot of room for infill, for small developments of housing. Your 8 to 15 houses, all the way from ADUs. I think one of the things I hear from landowners is who we want to incentivize to go forward with some infill, some smaller development, maybe like an ADU, is an education, right? They don't know where to begin. And I think they also don't know what is available to them. So I think we've done a really good job in our zoning, permitting and review, and the infrastructure. I think one thing we may need to target is that next marketing and education piece. So I'd be interested in hearing if there are ideas, or either from the team or from our consultant, if they had ideas of how do we not only incentivize, but how do we educate those homeowners on what they can do with their land and how to move that process forward.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Corliss, a great idea, and I maybe Melinda will talk about this more too, about what are we doing about it. And I know that there's a lot of conversation about marketing and outreach to folks who want to participate in that.
Wonderful, great, thank you.
Thank you.
It looks like that's it for now. Thank you so much, Deanna. All right, we've got our final item. Melinda, welcome. Melinda is providing a housing update goals.
Madam Mayor, Boise City Council members, Melinda McGoldrick, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I have a lot of updates to share with you, but I think the takeaway that you've heard from both Josh and Deanna, the great news is that there is a lot of space to build more housing. We have seen more housing coming online, which is excellent. What we know in HCD is a lot of the housing that we're seeing coming online is not necessarily serving folks who are at those lower incomes within our city. And so we know that there is still a significant need to build more housing that is serving folks who are at or below 60% AMI. And so that's really where the work of our housing and community development team comes in, and a lot of what I want to share with you today. So some of this you have seen before, but just as a little refresher, based on our housing needs analysis that was last done in 2024, we are looking at a need of about 20,000 new or significantly rehabbed homes by 2033. The great news there is that that number is going down. When we did our housing needs analysis in 2021, we were looking at needing to produce approximately 2,700 units per year. The analysis done in 2024 is much closer to 2,000 units per year. So we are making progress towards these goals. The other piece of this is that the majority of that need is for households who are at or below 80% of our area median income within our community. We also know that 51% of the households in our community are at that 80% or below area median income. So the housing need is still significant for folks in that space. So what are we doing about it? We have worked across this space to look at how we can address housing from a lot of different components. We know that housing is a very complicated thing. There's no one silver bullet that's going to solve housing in our community, but there are a lot of different levers that we can look at and a lot of different ways that we can attack the problem. So that's what we have sought to do. You've seen it through the changes to the zoning code and the improvements there that have made it easier to build more houses. It has diversified the type of housing that we can bring to our community, whether it's through ADUs, tiny homes on wheels, increased multifamily units, and easing that entire process. And especially looking at the incentives that we were able to put into the zoning code to make bringing affordable units online possible for more people to participate in that. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be the city moving in that space, but we can partner with developers to bring those units online as well. We've also targeted how we can invest our funds, both through land that the city owns that we can continue to put out for partners to build on through our land trust, and then gap financing that we're putting into other projects where we might not own the land, but we have somebody who has bought land and is interested in building affordable housing. So how can we help make that possible and get them across that finish line? And then finally, looking at how we can preserve existing affordability within our community. We have heard from a lot of different spaces that it's getting harder and harder to maintain housing that folks might already own, whether that's increases in taxes, challenges with repairs that they might need in order to keep their home safe and livable, and then just general rising costs where incomes haven't necessarily kept up with that, especially for some of our more vulnerable community members who live on a fixed income. So we have looked at how we can preserve existing affordability and make sure that we're not losing any of those homes out of our housing stock. So I wanted to share with you a few different sets of data. This data is looking at all of the homes that are serving households at or below 80% area median income across our community. This is homes that are coming online with and without city investment. So you can see here that approximately a little over 700 units have been completed, and we have an additional approximately 760 units that are under construction or in pre-development to come online. We also have a little over 500 units that have been preserved as existing affordable housing, and about 150 units of permanent supportive housing. The pie chart on the side is showing you the reason why those homes are affordable. So you can see in green, the vast majority of those homes are affordable because the city has invested in that project in some way. We also have projects that have come online because they have taken advantage of low-income housing tax credits and haven't necessarily needed the city to invest in that as well. There's projects that are built by mission-oriented developers, so they're building affordable housing often without our support. And then projects that have taken
advantage of housing bonus ordinance or other programs.
What is HOP?
Madam Mayor, HOP is the acronym for the Homeownership Opportunity Program, which is how we're assisting lower income households in attaining homeownership.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to know what LIHTC stands for.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Willetts, that stands for the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. So those are awarded through the Idaho Housing and Finance Association, and it's one of the key sources to bring these projects online.
And you hear it called LIHTC.
Yeah. And I apologize, please stop me if I'm using acronyms that folks aren't familiar with. I try not to, but it is our world. So thank you for those questions. So we know that bringing these projects online is a challenge, no matter how well resourced you might be. There's still a lot of constraints out there. And a big piece of what we have been able to do lately has been in thanks to the zoning codes. So we've seen about 10 projects coming through, taking advantage of those zoning code incentives. And then also looking at how we can continue to iterate on that process. So I know you'll see in front of you soon opportunities to make those zoning code incentives hopefully more usable within our community so that we will continue to see more and more projects coming through using those incentives. And then I also just wanted to flag one other piece for you that you, I believe, received in your council packet on Friday, was a memo about a partnership that we have been working on with CCDC, Capital City Development Corporation, and our housing authority, Boise City 80 County Housing Authorities, where we are looking at how we can partner to bring each agency's kind of unique strengths and resources to bear on this housing challenge, and how we can partner together to creatively finance and bring more of these projects online. So we also will be back in front of you later this spring to talk more about that, but just wanted to flag for you, we really are trying to look at all of the different opportunities to partner across the community and with different types of funding to get creative to bring these projects online. So this slide today is sharing a little bit about where we are at with allocating housing funds. This, just for everybody's awareness, is only looking at city general funds, and then the ERA2, the Emergency Rental Assistance Funds, and the ARPA funds that the city received that were kind of one-time opportunities where Madam Mayor and Boise City Council members directed those funds to be used towards housing. So looking at that in total, that's about $68.4 million. Of which we have expended almost 43 million. Another 11 of that is programmed. We have a couple projects where we're holding funds that are kind of penciled because we know that they are up and coming. They're just not quite at that place where we can commit the funds to the project officially yet. And then we do have about $10.4 million in funds that are not allocated, and that does include the 6.7 that we were just added to this fund in December. So we have a pipeline of projects. We have lots of things that are kind of in the works that are ready to move forward. And now that we have some additional funds to put towards that, we will be working diligently to get those commitments underway and to get those projects moved from kind of a due diligence space into the planning review and then through into construction. I also wanted to share with you a little bit with you tonight about how we are looking at our gap financing and kind of some of the things that we look at when we're going to invest in a project. So we know that our city funds are a crucial resource. We also recognize them as a very valuable and limited resource. And so we want to make sure that we're being excellent stewards of these funds. We're using those funds to lock in deeper and longer periods of affordability. So some of the other programs that people are taking advantage of have a slightly shorter period of affordability than what we typically require in our projects. So that's sometimes 15 years, sometimes 20 years. Typically, when we're investing in a project, we're requiring a minimum of 50 years of affordability. And if it's on our land, that goes even farther to 75 to 100 years. So we are really trying to use those funds to target folks who are at a lower income level and ensuring that those homes will remain affordable for a much longer period of time. Our funds are a really critical component. A lot of times they are that last bit to get a project over the edge when they need that financing in order to make it possible. However, very few projects are happening with only our funds. So we are in partnership on basically every project of any size that's happening. We do have targets for what we are aiming to invest in each project, you'll see there. So for affordable units, it's typically between $35,000 to $45,000 per unit that we're investing, and or generally a percentage of the total development cost that's between 10 to 12%. When we look at permanent supportive housing units, those numbers do go up because permanent supportive housing can be more challenging to develop, and the rents that you're going to typically be receiving are lower. And so they frequently need more upfront investment in order to make those projects happen. So in that space, we're looking at between $50,000 to $60,000 per door, or 10 to 15% of the total development cost. Okay, updates on goals for you all. When we began this work, we set a goal of developing 1,250 new units of housing that is affordable to households at or below 60% AMI. As of now, we are at 82% to our goal. So a lot of work has been happening in this space, and then more is coming, programmed on its way. So in pre-development, we have the Lusk redevelopment project that's going to bring an additional 360 units. Under construction is that orange bar right there, that's Dorado Station. And then 467 units that are projects that are already complete. The doors are open and folks are either living there or in the process of leasing up those units. It's worth noting that we have an additional 94 units that are at that 60 to 80% AMI. So this goal was very specific to households that are at or below 60%. So that's what you see on the slide. But we do have a few more that fall into that category of under 80%. I also wanted to just share with you an example of a project that's kind of falling into that space. So I know many of you were at the groundbreaking or the ribbon cutting, for the Denton Apartments recently. So this is just kind of a snapshot of the total development cost for that project. You'll see it's over $74 million. Of that, the city contributed $6.7 million. And that was approximately 9% of the total development costs. So it's a critical element. They needed that funding to make this project possible, but there's no way that we could have brought 191 affordable units online with only our $6.7 million. And then again, you see right there that we are right in that range of average investment per unit of about $35,000. Another of our goals was to develop 250 new units of permanent supportive housing. So this is for our households who are exiting homelessness. As of now, we are at 56% to our goal. We have several projects that are in the works, ready to move forward. One of which is the Sherwood, which recently submitted for its planning approvals. So that will be making its way through the system and then into building permits. We hope to be under construction on that project either late summer or early fall. And that will bring an additional 48 units. That is on the site that you may have formerly heard of, referenced as the Park Apartments. So that is coming. Under construction right now is New Path 2.0. So that's an additional 92 units of housing. And then we have two other projects that are kind of in that due diligence phase where they're still working through a lot of the logistics. They're working to assemble the rest of the financing that they'll need for those projects. But when those come through, that'll be an additional 92 homes, and that will bring us to 92% of our goal. So we are really close. Permanent supportive housing has been very hard. It has been a challenge, but we feel like we're making really meaningful steps forward on this and have a path to meet that goal. Again, this is an example, New Path 2. This is a slightly more complicated example than Denton because of the financing structures for this project. It's what we refer to as a twinned financing deal, which means that it is actually two entirely separate projects within one building. So there are two separate financing stacks. A certain number of units are assigned to each project, each side of the project there. So you'll see kind of that dark outline is for the project as a whole. So it's about a $35 million project. And our investment is about 16% of the total development cost. So we have a loan to either side of this project. And you'll see they kind of balance each other out to get to that 16% piece. Our final goal was around preservation. And our goal here was to preserve 1,000 units of housing for households at or below 60% AMI. As of now, we're at 55% to our goal. We have a couple projects that are in development that will bring us a lot closer. So that's looking at Wildwood, which is an acquisition rehab project that we are providing some gap financing to, and then partnering with our housing authority to make some updates to their buildings to ensure that those buildings can remain safe for all of their tenants. Preservation has been something of a tough nut to crack for us, just to be very honest with you all. But we do have a lot of things that we have learned over the last few years of kind of trying to get these projects underway and not finding a path to really a quick way to make it to that 1,000-unit goal. So first of all, gap financing and direct acquisition are kind of the fastest, highly impactful ways that we could make it to that goal. However, they are incredibly dependent on market conditions. A lot of times, the ability to move quickly to purchase something is something that city government is not always perfectly poised to be able to do, just working within our typical constraints to go through a purchase. But we know that that is a great way that we can preserve housing. And so we are always looking for those opportunities. If a multifamily building is to come up for sale, that's something that we're always evaluating, whether or not it would be something that the city could purchase in order to preserve that affordability for households. What we have seen pretty decent success in is looking at our home improvement programs and weatherization programs. And those are really serving folks who are in pretty vulnerable places. A lot of the folks being served through those programs are elderly, they're on fixed incomes. They might own their home, but they are having a challenge doing any of the work in that home to keep it livable that they might need so that they can age in place. So a lot of the things that we have been doing, besides like structural repairs, repairing holes that people can see down through into their crawl spaces or underneath their homes, the other components of that are making ADA improvements to their homes. That way, if folks need to have a roll-in shower for mobility purposes, things like that, as they age, that way they can stay in their homes and remain safe. So that is where we have been focusing a lot. We also have an excellent partnership with LADA, Community Action Partnership, where they do a lot of the weatherization work to help people reduce the amount of money that they're spending on utility bills, which again helps them remain safely housed. So the good news, this is not all bad news. It's just taken us a little while to work through kind of our strategy around preservation in a way that we can meaningfully work in this space. So we have kind of these three different tools that we're looking at. We are looking to diversify these opportunities for how we operate in this space. And generally, we are looking at kind of a different level of investment in these types of projects. So you saw our target for if we're investing in new construction is generally between $35,000 to $45,000 per door. We know if that we are going to go and try to acquire a project, that amount is going to be a lot higher. However, we have done this in the past. We acquired Sage Mobile Home Park, which preserved 26 homes for folks who were in a position that could have put their housing at risk. But where we are hoping to focus more is in this kind of gap financing and acquisition space. So that is a place that we can use several different types of funding that we have available to our team. Right now, we're partnering with a development firm who is going to acquire and rehabilitate the Wildwood Apartments, which is 38 units of housing. They have a contract with the housing authority, so most of the tenants in that space have vouchers, which means that, again, if this were to be redeveloped and turned into market rate housing, some of those tenants might lose that housing. Again, this is much more in line with where we kind of try to keep our target investments. So this is a great opportunity and something we're keeping an eye out for other housing that might be reaching the end of their low-income housing tax period, low-income housing tax credit compliance period, which is a time at which sometimes people decide they will either reinvest and keep the affordability, or they might choose to sell those developments. And so again, this is something that we're watching, but it is a space in which we have to try to be nimble, and that those pieces don't always come together in order for us to be able to make those investments. But our home improvement and weatherization programs are a much lower per door investment, and that's another space that we do intend to continue focusing because we know that we're serving very vulnerable households, and with a much lower impact to our overall budgets. I promise I am almost done. Another thing that I wanted to talk just briefly about is the city-owned rental housing. This housing is affordable. It is housing that the city has consciously made that determination that we want to be in this space, serving households who are not always able to find units that are suitable for their AMI levels. So a lot of the folks that we are serving are our most vulnerable populations. A lot of folks who are at or below 50% AMI, and even a large handful of them who are at or below 30% AMI. So across our entire portfolio, we have 184 units that is scattered across 31 different buildings. So we own everything from larger multifamily buildings to a large number of single family homes. Those are all throughout our community. Oh, you have recently seen over the past couple of years us come to you and talk about selling some of those homes. We have sold 9 homes. Some of those funds had to be returned to HUD because these homes were all bought using HUD funds. However, when we had those funds that did not have to go back to HUD, we have been reinvesting them into our rental housing portfolio to ensure that we are able to maintain our operations and that we don't have to come back and make additional requests of city budget dollars in order to maintain our portfolio. Our rents at this point in time do not actually generate enough cash in order to cover all of those costs. So these surplus sales have been instrumental in allowing us to continue to be self-sufficient, to self-solve some of our budgeting in this space, and then also to ensure that we're able to make the capital investments into these homes to keep them safe and livable for long periods to come. Okay, finally, takeaways. First of all, you have heard me talk about how partnerships are critical, but even more so, the investment that the city has made in housing through our general fund dollars that have been allocated towards this, and the mayor and city council members' push of the importance of housing, elevating the importance of this across our community has been incredibly vital. I was recently speaking with others and noting that we don't have a lot of the same tools that other states have to address housing challenges. And so here locally, it really is your commitment to housing and the city's willingness to invest their funds in housing that makes this possible. We have very few federal funds. We have very few other tools. And so we want to, first of all, thank you for your commitment to this and highlight how important it is for us to be able to do this work. We feel like we've made a lot of progress towards our goals. I know sitting back and looking at over the past 5 years, when we first started looking at how we could really meaningfully amp up our investment in housing, we were kind of building that plane as we were flying. We did not have a lot of the tools that now we have. And so with this increased investment that the city council made in housing, we look forward to being able to move on that much more nimbly. It took us a while to get our feet under us, to have a ground lease that we can use for all of our projects, to have a strategy, to have that target investment number. But we feel like we have made a lot of work in a space where housing feels very slow sometimes. But if you look at over the past 5 years, and having brought that number of units online is actually a pretty monumental attestation to all of your commitment to housing and to the importance of this work in our community. So we will continue to do this work. We cannot do this work alone. And we will continue to pull all of those different levers that you can make available to us and that we can identify as we continue to kind of lean into. There's nothing we can't do better. Trying to learn from other cities, trying to be creative, trying to problem solve wherever we can. That is all I have, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, first of all, Melinda, Maureen, Deanna, Josh, and even Nikki and Zach for your presentations yesterday. Thanks for all the hard work and bringing this information forward. It's super helpful, and it really helps, I think, to look at it a really large view. I'm glad that you used Wildwood as sort of an example of preservation. I think that, having worked in the nonprofit sector and spending a lot of time at our apartment complexes with kids and families, you sort of leave wondering, like, what happens when this apartment complex needs to be remodeled? And then every single unit immediately becomes more expensive. And so that's something that I think about a lot, when we've got some areas where, apartment complexes are now, 50 years old, and in need of some updates, and sort of the fear of what happens. So I appreciate that we're looking into different opportunities there and what preservation looks like, whether, it's gap financing or other partnerships. So I guess I would just encourage us to continue to be looking, at those. I think a lot of times, our tools like our weatherization and home repairs works really good on single family, and then becomes a much larger challenge when we're looking at multifamily. So continuing to explore that area, I think, is great. Just one quick comment, I can't help but look at some of the data that we're seeing, and then thinking the overlay with transportation on so many different levels as far as where the housing is going to go and where it's going to be. If there's opportunities to share some of this information, I think with ACHD, I think it's helpful for them as we're looking at our housing inventory to, where some of that stuff would go as well. But again, Melinda, I appreciate your specific presentation here, and for all the staff on these last ones. It's great to be able to look at this at a holistic view.
Madam Mayor, thank you for this presentation, and thank you for all the work that you've done. And I genuinely believe that what the city's done under the mayor's leadership and your work is cutting edge. And when I've looked at other jurisdictions that have worked on this, even nearby, I'm surprised at the even the cost per unit that I've seen to get some of this inventory online. The thing that I keep thinking about, and I brought it up a couple times in our past work sessions on housing affordability, is based on how these deals come about, they seem incredibly complicated, difficult to identify, and you're doing your best to keep up with what tax credits are available, what developer has financing, what properties become available. And I imagine it gets difficult to kind of meet intended targets on whether or not something's 80% AMI, 60% AMI, permanent supportive housing. I guess with a focus on permanent supportive housing, how are we doing there? How can we be more intentional? And what unique challenges come with those types of projects?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, that is an excellent point, and you are definitely correct. Permanent supportive housing can be a lot more challenging to bring to the market. Outside of the new path projects, what we have seen has not been the market coming into that space, or even some of our more mission-driven developers working in that space necessarily. But on city-owned land, we do have the opportunity to say, this is what we want the space to be. And so those projects that are kind of in the pipeline that will be moving forward are both on city-owned land. And the other kind of critical component around permanent supportive housing is not necessarily just the cost to it, but that you need to have a willing partner who wants to come and fully understand the need for services in that space. And we honestly just do not have a deep bench of folks who are providing those types of services. And the few organizations that are doing it are doing an excellent job, but at some point they are going to be tapped out on resources in order to continue doing that. And so that's a space I think we have opportunity to look at how we can develop further partnerships. If there's other organizations who might be interested in working in Boise who haven't necessarily done that before. We had some early conversations with a few firms who potentially were interested in doing that. We haven't seen them do it yet, but it's definitely a space that we're continuing to explore, what we can do to bring those projects online and what other mechanisms besides us, owning the land and dictating this is what we want to have happen here, kind of where we can be in that space.
Madam Mayor, Linda, on this, when you mean services, do you mean wraparound services? Okay. And then have we ever done any work to quantify the need of permanent supportive housing and kind of what that gap is? I would love to have a figure in mind of we would need to be investing X amount of dollars per year, even if the market conditions were right, for us to get to a place where we're providing the level of units that are needed to help folks exit homelessness more quickly.
Absolutely. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nash, I believe we do have that information and we can bring it to you in a follow-up. I don't have it off the top of my head.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And I'll jump in there too. We set the goal of 250 and we're working our way to that. What's not quantified here, and we're not counting it towards, say, the supportive housing investment fund, the usage of those funds, but is the scattered site model for families exiting homelessness. So we set the number of 250 And then also we've been tracking the number of homes that are being put into the, I don't know what you want to call it, the hopper for families exiting homelessness. That's really, it'd be fun to bring that to council too, again, so that we can really see how the community has responded in that space.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I know we're at time, so I'll be brief. First of all, Melinda, this is a really great presentation. All this information tonight has been so helpful to understand our housing, not just our housing needs, but also where we can develop what types of developments. I appreciate the breakdown of the Denton. I was wondering, we tell people they're so complicated and stacked, and when you see those numbers, you can see how complex it is. I'm really proud of our city and the work that our housing team has done, and from the direction of the mayor and our council to continue to promote and support housing. And I, like Councilmember Nash said, I think we're kind of setting some standards from what I'm seeing as well. My one comment, I guess, would be at the end is tiny homes on wheels. I do love this new housing type, and I think this might be one new lever for us to explore as maybe setting up some or working with someone on setting up a piece of land that could support those who do own tiny homes on wheels, having a spot to hook up that has the infrastructure available to that. And I think that'd be a very low cost way for us to invest in some new type of housing coming in at an affordable level. Thank you.
Councilmember Willetts.
Mayor, thank you. I have a question, and obviously I know that you won't have this right now. First of all, a compliment. Thank you. This has been very thorough, very helpful. There's a lot of layers to this, and I appreciate you spelling those out, particularly with the Denton property. What I would like to see is the same kind of concept for the almost 900 units that the city has directly or indirectly funded through taxpayer dollars. How much went to that particular project, and then how many units were accomplished? And then something else is just how we define a unit as well. And obviously this is something that you can get at another time.
Great. And after this, if folks have anything else that you'd like follow-up information on, we can get that. I think my team might have some questions, Councilmember Willetts, about your questions, so they'll check in with you on that too. I just want to say, as we're closing, Melinda, thanks for this presentation. Nikki and Kaya are here, and it was rightly pointed out that behind and alongside Melinda are many other people on the second floor. And then CCDC is here too. I'm sorry that I had to miss the session yesterday. I was really excited to watch it, and then I couldn't. But I want to acknowledge that this has taken so many people. You're doing great work. When we set these goals 5 years ago, we knew they'd be difficult. And our thinking was, well, if we don't set them, we'll never get there. So we're going to set them, and it's okay that we haven't been able to get there. We've tried really hard, and we've learned so much. And I appreciate the transparency, especially on preservation, because we're trying to figure out how we can get there. And if we hadn't set the goals and we weren't tracking our progress, we wouldn't know. And so that to me has always been really important, that we set these goals and we work like hell to get to them, knowing that we wouldn't get nearly as far as we have if we never set them in the first place. And it means real things to real people that call Boise home. So I want to thank all of you for that. And I want to do special shout out to CCDC, who has really leaned in to our request that we look at how we can deepen partnerships and innovate and encourage housing in these districts throughout the city as well. So thanks for being here, and thanks for that. And with that, we're going to take a break for dinner. If anybody's got follow-up questions or more information you want to see, just let us know through your team, and we'll get that to you too. Thanks all.
Thank you.